Hi everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. I would like to continue where I left off last week, where we talked about justice versus fairness in the Richard Allen and Bryan Kohberger cases. But the video was going to run into overtime, and I decided to let the Kohberger case rest until this week. And this week, I don't know how much more there is to say which has not already been said. But because I am still not convinced that Bryan Kohberger is the sole perpetrator, and because things seem just a little dodgy around the case, and because this is indeed my channel, I think I can take a few minutes to share my doubts with you and air my thoughts, following on to the theme of last week, but only applying it to the Kohberger case. Like I said before numerous times, I still cannot see how one single person who is not a professional fighter, not a professional hitman, has never had military training, who did not use a firearm, could do what Kohberger is accused of doing in 8 to 13 minutes. That is, of course, number one and right on top of my pile of doubts in this case. The second item on my pile of doubts is, of course, the 8 hours it took the housemates to call 911. I cannot accept that neither of them, particularly the one who actually stayed on the same floor as where two of the murders took place and directly under where the other two took place, did not hear anything. Dylan Mortensen, as far as I'm aware, is not stupid nor deaf, but more than that, if she maintains that although she heard things, she had no inkling that a crime was committed, then I would like her to explain how she managed to not use the bathroom for nearly 10 hours, if not more. Because had she used the bathroom, I am 100% sure she would have noticed that a violent crime took place. Remember, we are being told that Ethan's body was up against the door. So, in order to open the door, the body had to be moved. So, I'm sure that there must have been some blood, something seeping underneath that door. Something which I cannot understand and which I do not hear anyone else talking about is that right in the beginning it was said that there was blood elsewhere, in the kitchen area in particular. So, had Dylan visited the bathroom, which is directly in front of Xana's room, or had gone to the kitchen, she must have observed blood. How else could she not? According to another report, investigators and police could smell the smell of death the moment they stepped into the house. How is it possible that Dylan Mortensen did not know, did not realize, and did not have the decency and common sense to call 911? I do not understand it at all. And what I despise even more are people saying, oh, but she is young. Well, she was old enough to move away from home and drive a vehicle. She was 19 and not 9. The third item on my pile of doubts is, of course, the DNA. From what we have seen and heard so far, the DNA on the clip of the knife sheath was the only DNA found to link Bryan Kohberger to the murders. And that DNA was indeed touch DNA. We are not talking about hair, saliva, or blood. We know that at least two of the victims fought back. So how is it possible that not a single hair, not a single fleck of skin was found on or around any of the victims? And after such a violent crime, how is it possible that not a single piece of DNA of even one of the four victims was found in Bryan's car, in his apartment, his office, or his parents' home? So far, Ann Taylor and her team had done a good job, but in my opinion, they made a huge mistake when they waived Bryan's right to a speedy trial. The three main areas of doubt, in my opinion, is exactly what would have gotten Bryan off a month or two or three ago. There is, or at least there was, just not enough to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But the longer he sits in jail, the more or the worse it is starting to look. If I was innocent of such a heinous crime, I would have been screaming and shouting my innocence every darn day that I was sitting in that jail. I would have begged to get out. I also do not understand why Ann Taylor and her team even bothered to fight against cameras in the courtroom. If I was Ann Taylor and I believed that my client was innocent, I would instead have fought for the process to be as open and transparent as possible. The other mistake, which I think is being made, and had I been Bryan Kohberger's lawyer, I would have done something about. That is, had I believed in his innocence, and that would be to convince his family to give him more visible support. I know and I understand that they live far from Moscow, Idaho. I understand that they are not teenagers anymore, and I do not know much about their financial position. For all we know, they do call him on the jailhouse phone once or twice per week. We don't know. But although they attended his extradition hearing and issued a statement via an attorney, and I believe they did also testify in front of the grand jury, I just feel that it is not enough. If they feel deep in their hearts and soul that their son Bryan was innocent, again, I'm basing their actions on how I would have reacted. If I thought my son was innocent, I would have been right there next to him, fighting almost every day. I look at Bryan Kohberger in court, and he may be well dressed, and he even sometimes displays some signs of confidence, from time to time. But overall, he looks lost, lonely, and abandoned, and it makes one wonder why, particularly seen in contrast with someone like Richard Allen, whose wife is in court regularly, regardless of what the hearing is about, regardless of the significance of the hearing. So, if I was to guess, remember, we don't know any of these people, we can only guess. My guess would have been that Richard Allen's wife 100% believes that he is innocent. As a defense attorney, that is exactly what I would want for my client. And in Bryan's case, it would have helped to see his family in court supporting Bryan. We have also heard so much about the possible exculpatory evidence Bethany Funk allegedly holds. If there is any truth in that, then why did they railroad this case through a grand jury instead of a preliminary hearing? Why not go through the process of a preliminary hearing so that everyone could hear that supposed exculpatory evidence and or could decide for themselves whether it was indeed exculpatory evidence or not? What about the other two DNA profiles? I find the mention of this rather confusing because this was a house full of students, girls with friends and boyfriends. So, of course, there will likely be hundreds of other DNA profiles in the house. So why would only two other DNA profiles be brought into question? I can only assume that those DNA profiles were found on top of or over other evidence related to the crime, which in layman's terms mean it was left there during or after the crimes were committed. Now, if that is the case, then why has it not been as thoroughly investigated as, say, Bryan's DNA? Why didn't they go through the same process of doing familial DNA on those two profiles? Remember Bryan asking whether anyone else had been arrested when he was arrested. This further led most of us to believe that he was not alone in all of this. Now, if this is indeed the case, then why has Bryan not pointed the finger at someone else yet? And Taylor also said that there is no provable link between Bryan Kohberger and any of the victims, and there are various pieces of gossip stating that Bryan Kohberger followed one of the girls on social media or visited the restaurant where Maddie and Zanna worked, etc., etc. So, if Ann Taylor says there is no provable link, then neither of these pieces of gossip would or could be true. And if it is true that there is no link, then why would Bryan Kohberger choose that particular house? If he was fixated on one of the girls, why not get hold of her when she is alone? If there was a problem with Ethan, the same would apply. What did Bryan Kohberger do in the 12 to 24 hours before the murders? Who did he talk to? Who did he phone, email, and where did he go? I think that would be something rather important, because if you think he is guilty, then there must have been something leading up to the crime. As you may know, I am fascinated by the Suzanne Morphew case, and in my opinion, they had far more circumstantial evidence in that case than in Bryan Kohberger's case. Yet Barry walked relatively quickly, and Bryan, with far less evidence, at least that we know of, Bryan is still awaiting some kind of outcome almost a year later. None of it makes any sense, and I'm still stuck on the notion that Bryan was an accessory after the fact. I still feel Bryan was called either to provide a getaway ride or was possibly set up, but by whom? How much sense does it make that a 28-year-old with no record decides one night to get into his car and go kill one, two, three, or four strangers in a random house miles away from where he lives? If that was the case, why execute such a plan in a densely populated area if he could have done the exact same thing in a less densely populated area where there are likely less or maybe even no cameras at all. I think it is only fair to the public that law enforcement and the justice system answer or attempt to answer at least half of these questions, because had I lived in Moscow, I would still have been double locking my windows and double locking my doors. Okay, guys, that is it for now. I'll be back soon as I see old Chad Daybell's delusions are playing up again. He really believes he is God, doesn't he? We'll talk about that next time. So until then, please take good care of yourselves and each other. Bye.